Thank you for waiting. We will start plenary session 3. Dialogue amongst Japan, China, and Korea. Japan, China, Korea's roles for climate policy. Partnership for a New Age. First, we received the video message from Mr. Yasuo Fukuda, the former Prime Minister of Japan. In June of 2008, Mr. Fukuda went to Low Carbon Society seminar and he gave a speech. And by 2050, as the long-term target for Japan, CO2 reduction of 60 to 80% was mentioned. Or he mentioned that target. So the Low Carbon Society was something that he had a role in spreading, not just in Japan, but in the rest of the world. Now, please, in front of you. I congratulate the holding of International Forum for Sustainable Asia and Partnership 2015, ISAP, along with or organized by IGES and the UNU. The theme for this year is Forging Multi-stakeholder Partnerships Towards 2030, which is quite timely. The very first of this forum was held 7 years ago, immediately after the Toyako G8 summit held when I was the Prime Minister. At that summit, the biggest theme was to reduce CO2 by 50% by 2050. There was a consensus among G8 countries, including Russia, with the US agreeing on this for the first time. At the G20 meeting, which was held around the same time, China, Korea, India, Indonesia, and other countries agreed to this spirit. So that was truly a memorable moment. I still remember to this day that I felt exhilarated, thinking that now that the world has come together, we have a foundation on which to make progress while consulting with each country to achieve the goal. 3 years later, due to the misfortunes of tsunami disaster and nuclear power plant accident, Japan faced the necessity to fundamentally rethink the dependence on nuclear power, which was then the policy. Since then, we have not been able to present a firm policy. Finally, in recent months, we are starting to see the possibilities of restarting nuclear power plant, and we are seeing some progress on measures against global warming. However, in the past few years, even though it was a result of unexpected natural disaster, we caused a lot of inconvenience on the part of the international community. Because of that, Japan needs to further intensify its effort to take measures against global warming. At the time of Global 8 Toyako Summit, we set a high target of 60 to 80% reduction for the developed countries, along with 50% reduction by 2050. We also determined to reduce the emissions by 80% by 2050, which is a high numerical target. Things were different back then, so an 80% reduction meant that dependence on nuclear power would have been unavoidable. Even so, considering radiation issue and depletion of resources, we couldn't have decided to entirely depend on nuclear in the future. I remember that the percentage of nuclear power was kept at a low level. In order to build a sustainable society, we need a technological innovation. It requires a completely new technology, the kind that maintains a sustainable global society with whose raw materials are available infinitely and does not emit any CO2. On the other hand, the population on Earth continues to grow. In order to raise the standard of living for everyone, energy and resources needed would continue to expand infinitely. We need the development of technology, but at the same time, we need to gradually change our lifestyle. Laozi, the Chinese philosopher, said, "Enough is as good as a feast." Along with "mottai-nai" by Nobel Prize laureate Ms. Matai, these phrases need to be part of global language. In an era where such a change is needed, the roles and responsibilities of the 3 East Asian countries, namely Japan, China, and Korea, are tremendous, as they account for 1/3 of global emissions. The 3 countries should cooperate so that their capabilities can be fully utilized in combating the global warming problem. Fortunately, these 3 countries have the technical expertise and economic prowess. Furthermore, the level of interest in COP21 is quite high, so there should be a sufficient impact on the international community. Japan, China, and Korea are all industrial countries in Asia. It is possible to deliver results by competing against each other in terms of technology and mutually cooperate where appropriate, increasing interdependency. To do that, we need to promote mutual understanding among the three countries. At this forum, the world-renowned Mr. Jeffrey Sachs is present. Also from Japan, Ms. Yoriko Kawaguchi, who exercised leadership at COP6, and Mr. Nobuo Tanaka, who has always thought about stable energy supply in the world, are also participating. Together with many experts, I hope that the forum will have huge success. Thank you very much. So we will start the plenary session. The moderator is Mr. Hironori Hamanaka, Chair of the Board of Directors. Now I'd like to announce the change in the panelists. The former Director General of the Energy Research Institute of the National Development and Reform Commission in China, Mr. Zhou Dabi. We will have Mr. Zhang Kejun of ERI. Mr. Hamanaka, please. Good afternoon, everyone. So starting in the morning, we had Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and as he mentioned in his talk, IPCC's fifth report, or according to ICCP fifth report, the world is, in order to prevent the serious damages of global warming, towards the second half of this century, around 2070, the emissions would have to be zero. So low carbon society or zero carbon would be necessary. Earlier, during the plenary session 2, the climate change in order to foster measures to be taken against global warming towards COP21, there was a discussion on how to put in place the mechanism and to come up with dynamic and ambitious goals set by various countries, or so I imagine. So during this session in East Asia, China, Korea, and Japan, these three countries are playing a huge role. So each country's potential is quite huge. So the three countries are currently seriously making an effort towards low carbon society, and there's the expertise in economy, technology, and others. However, if you look at the global emissions, these three countries account for 30% of the total global emissions. So that means how these three countries can cooperate with each other and what kind of leadership can be shown to the rest of the world will be quite crucial as the world is to move towards low or zero carbon society, and how effectively the world can move in that direction. So these three countries play a key role. So during this session, in a long-term perspective, I'd like to get excellent leadership, and the research institutes should cooperate with each other. So the Climate Policy Forum among Japan, China, and Korea is envisioned. So to that end, we have here with us as participants on the panel, we have Ms. Yoriko Kawaguchi, the former Minister of the Environment and who is currently a professor at Meiji Institute for Global Affairs. of major universities. So I'd like to ask Professor Kawaguchi to deliver a keynote address. And then I will give introductions later on, but other panelists will participate in the panel discussion. Before that, actually, from China and Korea, we will have presentation. So before each presentation or panel discussion, I will introduce all the panelists. So first, Professor Kawaguchi, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I am Yoriko Kawaguchi. The international community agreed on the 2-degree target in Cancun, necessary to stabilize climate at a safe level. And in order to achieve that target, we need to create a society in which annual per capita emission is 2 tons by the year 2050. In the G7 Elmau summit held in June this year, the leaders supported the emission reduction by a higher part of the range between 40 to 70% by 2050 compared to 2010, which more or less corresponds with 2 tons per capita target, as you see from the screen. Am I operating this computer or you are doing it? Thank you. Okay, so as you see from this graph, currently per capita emission in the US, by far the US is at the top, Korea is 11 tons, Japan is 10, and China is 7. So towards the 2 tons target, we need to pursue a quite drastic reduction path going forward. So this is a common challenge among us all 3 countries. This will require a drastic shift, but we need to find areas where we can agree to cooperate to lead the way for making such drastic shift a reality. Japan, China, and Korea form a geographical region that is already comparable to the US and Europe in terms of technological and financing capabilities. By working together, we can exert greater impact on and contribution to the world. Talking about how interconnected we are, trade volume and interdependency, investment among the 3 countries, those things all dictate us to cooperate. And as Director Hamanaka said, we 3 countries are all eager to introduce renewable energy. And in 2014, the 3 countries accounted for 46% of the total investment newly made in the world in this field. China especially accounts for a big portion. So that means we are in the leading position in the world for development of renewable energy sources. And because we know that we are heavily dependent on overseas fossil fuel, a common challenge we share. On the other hand, promotion of renewable energy sources require demand and supply adjustment and upgrading of domestic power grid, all of which are our common challenges as well. It is important that together we identify challenges of future expansion of renewable energy and discuss what kind of effective cooperation is possible to address those challenges. Coal-fired thermal power is a cheap and stable energy source and has played a central role in the energy mix of all three countries, and that's represented by blue here. However, coal-fired thermal power, its CO2 emission for generating a unit of electricity is about twice as high compared to natural gas-fired thermal power. To be in line with the goal of stabilization of climate, which is a society with per capita emission of 2 tons, introduction of highly efficient facility with CCS needs to be considered. And mid to long term, we all need to make a shift away from coal-fired technology to other energy sources. This is one of the areas where it is worthwhile for three countries to come together for joint research on coming up with a strategy for making such transition. The US, UK, Northern European countries, as well as the World Bank have announced that in principle they will stop supporting developing countries for their coal-fired power. On the other hand, we three countries are still providing support and cooperation to developing countries in this respect. This is another area of potential cooperation between us. It would be significant if we could come up with common guidelines for CO2 emission in terms of providing support for coal-fired power generation as part of our endeavor to stabilize the climate. So I have been talking about Japan, China, and Korea, but please allow me to refer to China in particular. China has announced that it will peak its CO2 emission by about 2030, which I appreciate as an effort. However, as China is the second largest economy in the world, I would like to see China's proactive and positive contribution to leading a successful negotiation toward a new global framework, which goes beyond simply addressing its own challenges or playing its role as a leader of G77. As China is the biggest country of emission, it will also be necessary for the country to further clarify when and at what level it will peak out, and whether that can be further accelerated or not. Recently, Japan has announced and also submitted its target to reduce GHG emissions by 26% by 2030 from 2013 level. I understand that this number itself is controversial, but it's Japan's responsibility to continue to raise its level of ambition on top of the effort already made amidst the lingering impact from the Great East Japan earthquake and the further promotion of renewable energy source, although the Japanese government has not yet clearly stated that it will take on that responsibility, but I think Japan needs to do so. Our three countries are at different development stages. China has a latecomer's advantage, which Japan also enjoyed in the past. Learning from the mistakes made by more advanced nations, Japan was able to avoid failing in some respects. Japan successfully developed energy-efficient green technologies, taking the oil crisis as an opportunity. But Japan has also failed to have more comprehensive approach to, for instance, urban development, as industrial, transport, and construction sectors were in silos in addressing global warming. I think in this respect, China could learn a lot from Japan and Korea. For low-carbon society, we need to pursue innovation. Innovation not only in terms of hardware, but also in terms of software. How can we trigger innovation, commercialize it, and create a society that accepts innovation to materialize the world with per capita emission of 2 tons is an issue of software. This is also a common challenge for us all. Just for your reference, this shows you how much is invested into R&D of hardware technology across all industrial sectors in each country of Japan, China, and Korea. The size of the bubble represents each country's investment value. Green is Korea, and Japan is there as well, and then lower left, China is there as well. And as you can see, all 3 countries are spending a considerable amount of money for R&D. There is a rapid rise of investment in infrastructure in Asia to support its economic growth. This approach should be coupled with low carbonization. In order to reduce GHG emissions, it is important to fully utilize innovative financing mechanisms provided by ADB and AIIB in the future. Community-based initiatives will play even more important roles. Because we have similar cultural and social background, we can share approaches for low-carbon city and compare them with good understanding of each other. As I have outlined, Japan, China, and Korea share a variety of challenges and areas of interest. Therefore, it would be worthwhile focusing on those and deepen our research collaboration. Through our cooperation, 1 + 1 + 1 can be more than 3. Through joint research, let us find a form of cooperation that can be emulated across the world. I wish to see that happening. And with that wish, I would like to conclude my remarks. So what are the areas of cooperation among those 3 countries? So that's been my topic. Thank you very much.
川口先生、ありがとう。
Thank you very much, Professor Kawaguchi. So we have experts from Korea and China. So I'd like to ask for a presentation. I will switch to English.
Professor Ho-Sun Lee. He is the Vice Chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC. And also he is a professor at Korea University Graduate School of Energy and Environment. May I invite Professor Ho-Sun Lee?
I'm very happy to be invited to this important session about the tripartite collaboration toward the low economy transformation, which we all would like to have for the remainder of this century. I would like to identify the areas of potential collaboration among 3 countries. I have selected 4 areas that was based upon Korea's experience of pursuing climate-resilient economic growth. In doing so, we have identified a number of barriers and costs, and at the same time, we realized that some measure of transnational collaboration or cooperation may have the possibility of reducing costs that may appear when each country pursue individual unilateral action. I would like to present those experiences to you in my presentation. Korea has been very attentive to what science community has said regarding the threats of climate change the problems, and its policy has been always very attentive to formulate a nationally driven policy, also simultaneously science-based policy formulation. In that regards, our policy experience has been firmly grounded what, for instance, the IPCC has said in the last several assessments. So I would like to very briefly summarize what IPCC has said in the last assessment, because you probably heard this numerous times, but because Korea climate change policy has been firmly attentive to what IPCC has said. As you may have so many times, the 2 degrees emissions path implies that by 2030, the world's emission has to peak at 20 gigaton of CO2 equivalent, and then will gradually decline to zero by 2100. That means a carbon budget of 275 gigaton. At today's rate of carbon emission, this implies that probably less than 30 years of the energy consumption that's left with regard to the carbon budget. Now, this implies the tremendous drastic energy transformation that in order to achieve 2 degrees C. For instance, by 2035, 60% of primary energy that must be from renewable energy. And by that same year, the electricity, all of electricity consumption has to come from the low carbon sources. This energy transformation, as you see in this timeline, must be done within next 20 years. Now, this poses a great deal of problem to the developing countries, especially they need the increased access to capacity building, also technology, finance, and knowledge sharing to meet this challenge of energy transformation. And the reason that the developing country has to overcome this challenge and to create new opportunity is that the risks from no action is certainly much greater than risks of mitigation under all scenarios. Now, the IPCC, the latest assessment, clearly indicates that the ambitious mitigation is possible, and delaying mitigation that will be substantially costly. Now, Korea's contribution to the global aspiration for low carbon economy transition began rather recently, and in 2009 it adopted green growth as the foundation of future economic development. By the way, you have heard in previous session from the Ambassador Raegon Chung. He is one of the principal experts in formulating this green growth platform. And Korea facilitated the launching of the Global Green Growth Institute. And this is one of the institutes that Korea formally established for an international scale to achieve the green growth platform for around the world. And then it announced a voluntary mitigation plan for 2020 after that, and then it became the host country of the Green Climate Fund. And then beginning from this year, they implemented the nationwide CO2 cap and trade system. And then the last year, it announced a contribution of additional $100 million to the GCF, specifically for capacity building for the developing countries. And quite recently, it submitted the very ambitious mitigation plan for 2030. Now, while the country has been pursuing these efforts, there are a number of barriers and costs were identified. But the other side of these barriers and costs we found that are really the potential candidate for transnational, especially for tripartite collaboration for low carbon transformation. We all know that the cost of renewable energy is greater than the cost of conventional fuels. This is not specifically limited to the Korean example, but all countries experience these problems. Now, this involves certainly technology aspect, but as well as also the pricing aspect too. Especially from the technology side, there's great need to reduce system integration cost of renewable energy. Now, the first approach to solve this problem is pricing of carbon emissions, but any policy measures must be gauged from the angle of institutional feasibility. Now, the carbon pricing, regardless of where it is considered or mentioned, always meets these problems of institutional feasibility. So the low carbon economy transformation need to pass two criteria. One is public acceptance and the private profitability. Right now, we do not have either of those. Now, I have identified 4 areas possible for collaboration between the 3 countries. The first is expand the use of natural gas. The problem of expanding the natural gas at this time is that the price is so high. As you know very well, the LNG pricing is the remnant of the old days when the natural gas was a subsidiary product of oil. Now, the market has changed drastically, and therefore it requires a new thinking about the LNG pricing. I believe the new pricing of LNG can be worked out among 3 countries, and the end result of that will be beneficial both to exporter of LNG and also the importer of LNG. The second is we need some form of transnational electricity and natural gas grid. This is especially important because the expanded network of this electricity and natural gas can be a good insurance against the intermittent supply of renewable energy. In other words, this have the potential to reduce the system integration cost of renewable energy. And as you well very know, the 1 unit of renewable energy power plant requires at least 3 units of flexible electricity generation power plants. Now, one cannot think of coal-fired plants can perform that function. Obviously, it has to be natural gas in the meantime. And we need to seek a best practice nuclear safety regulations. Although nuclear has a great deal of public acceptance problems, to meet the 2°C target, we do not have luxury of picking one technology over the other. Lastly, we need to have a regional carbon market. In that sense, we can have a meaningful contribution to seek some measure of carbon pricing at the global scale. I believe that the low carbon economy transformation ultimately depends upon every country's willingness to adopt the carbon pricing, first locally, regionally, and globally. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Ho-Sun Lee, for your presentation. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Jung Kye-jun. He is a senior researcher from Energy Research Institute, National Development and Reform Commission, the government of People's Republic of China. Dr. Jiang Kejun, please.
Because today's topic is talking about 3 countries. We say it's a new firm. What do we do? And we also have a lot of discussion. What's the new value added for that? Basically, we want to pass several messages. The first one is for the 2 degree, we can do. All the 3 countries, we should take the lead on the future for the 2 degree, just like Madam Kawaguchi-san mentioned about that is 2/10 per capita for CO2 emission. And second one is how to work together for these 3 countries. And maybe next one is how to help others. So today's my topic we'll talk about first. Yes, we can do, at least from Chinese side. And we do the research, whether we can go to the 2 degree or not. This is our just a result from our study. Dr. Hong Sen already mentioned about the IPCC funding for the pathway for the 2 degree. Let's say it's exactly the same with the previous talk that by 2050, 2100, we nearly go to 0 emission. And we're also talking about a little bit for the political one. So that's a burden sharing. Or this time, in the new IPCC report, we a little bit worried about burden sharing. So we changed that to be effort sharing. We should do our effort to do this. But anyway, you can see in the EAS means East Asia. We should not include Japan and Korea. So in that one, China nearly account more than 90% of the CO2 emission in that region. So basically, this is mean China. This figure just shows by 2030 how much CO2 emission should be compared with 2010. All the figure shows that for China, it should be by 2030 the CO2 emission should be around same with the emission in 2010 or even be lower. It's using a lot of effort sharing regimes, including the methodology which Chinese government preferred. That's a accumulated CO2 emission per capita. But we still have the similar figure. That means Chinese CO2 emission by 2030 should be at least go back to the similar emission level by 2010, with 2010. So then we did the scenario for China. I think the first 3 line, the top 3 line, we published it before Copenhagen. That's before year 2009. We tried to push to tell China can do CO2 emission peak around 2030. But basically, almost nobody believed that at that time. So we were very lonely. But the good news is by 2011, before that, we tried to open our data from the model. So by 2011, many of the models in China, they have the similar result. By 2030, China can reach the peak. This is becoming why China get a very strong confidence. We can announce China can reach peak of CO2 emission by 2030. But unfortunately, this is not enough. With the IPCC new process, because I'm also in charge of Chapter 6 of IPCC AR5, Working Group 3, which is on the scenario part. So the 2 degree scenario, please have a look at this. China had to peak CO2 emission before 2030. From our scenario, we conclude that China can peak our CO2 emission before 2025, which is feasible for China. We did a very detailed study why we can do such kind of thing. We tried to get the people again convinced. That's basically the word in the NDC for China. The sentence mentioned about China will try to peak earlier. So the information basically comes from this model. So we try to say, but nowadays we have a lot of to do. So we try to get much more people to understand why China can do this. We did a study from economic structure and energy efficiency progress, renewable and nuclear power generation, whether we can go ahead with that, and also carbon capture and storage. What's the new technology? We even joined the 3 feasibility study for CCS in China because we try to get the data from the industry. We can use that in our model. And we also try to use data to tell our colleagues in China CCS is still feasible and could be one policy option. And we do the low carbon lifestyle. So this is good. We work together with NIS and IGES on this low carbon society project, try to bring the new message to that. But so far, China, we don't have very good policy on the land use part. This is also our next target. We'll do a lot of study for land use, try to mitigate greenhouse gas emission from that part. Economic structure change is changing. We tried to pass the message 7 years ago, but we failed. So now China's economy go like this way. Then suddenly changed. This is 2 years. So that's the reason why 2 days ago, China just released new data for the first half year on energy in China. You can see it's an amazing change. So for sure, this year, China's CO2 emission will reduce a lot. I think it will be around 150 million ton CO2 emission reduction this year because of the, one of the driving forces is economic structure change. In the meantime, power generation have a very strong changing picture. Renewable energy development is going very well. Nuclear move very fast. In the meantime, the growth rate of power generation is very low, just like 1.3% in the first 6 months. So that means coal-fired power plant reached the peak because every year newly installed capacity for renewable energy and nuclear can support China's 3.5% newly increased power demand. And in the meantime, we can do co-benefit. Actually, it's another way. Everybody knows we have a very big trouble with air quality in China. So the government released a very strong policy package to do with that. So it's so strong that we can see the driving force for coal to be reduced by today is mainly driven by the air pollution control policy. But in the meantime, we try to put them together. If we do low carbon, it's a very good benefit for air quality in China. And we also try to tell the message that actually we also learned today from this room, the technology progress is perfect. And these 3 countries should take the lead for this technology progress. It's not only for the mainstream of technology, but many other technology could be combined with them. So for example, how to install offshore wind. In the world, there's only a few companies can do such kind of work. But the Chinese company is learning to do with that. And politically, China is also changing the situation. For example, the first time in last November in APEC, China released the China-US announcement on climate change. The first time we specified to support a 2-degree target. If China want to support 2-degree target, that means we have to follow the global CO2 emission pathway. And they mentioned about try to peak by 2030, make effort to peak earlier. And they also mentioned about both countries maybe will more strict target in the future. This gave more space. I'm not sure how about this time in Paris. But this figure also already showed by Madam Kawaguchi that the renewable energy so far is perfect in China. Just I like the picture showed that China's investment on renewable energy is 31%. Japan is 13%. Korea is 1%. But maybe in the coming future, Korea also can catch up. So these 3 countries are very important. If we put, this is only for renewable energy, but if we put nuclear also together, these 3 countries will account more than 50% of newly investment we see on green energy. This is only 3 countries. So this is our way we are doing with that. The last sentence I want to mention, last slide I want to mention about is just 1 month ago. No, it's not 1 month. I think, yes, 1 month ago, June 30, China submitted our NDC to UNFCCC, which mentioned about the target for renewable energy. For example, they mentioned about the solar power by 2020 will be 100 gigawatt in the NDC for China. But good news is just 3 days or 4 days ago, the National Energy Administration revised its target, increased from 100 gigawatt to be 150 gigawatt. And I believe very soon the NEA also will revise the target for wind. So that's a perfect work we are doing. That means we have some potential to go earlier than 2030 to reach the peak. If China can do that, for example, we follow, now we want to push China, try to peak CO2 emission around 2020 to 2022 by using carbon pricing, carbon market, and many policies to do that. If China can do this for 2 degrees, our answer is yes, we can do 2 degrees from Chinese viewpoint. Thank you very much. That's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jang Kejun, for your presentation. さて、それでは、
So now, so far, we heard from 3 countries. So the experts from 3 countries talked about each country. We have about 30 minutes, so I would like to have a panel discussion. As we begin, I'd like to call upon Dr. or Professor Hikaru Kobayashi. He's the project professor at Keio University. In 2011, it was, I believe, in the Ministry of the Environment, or he served as the Vice Minister of the Environment, but he retired, and he became the professor at Keio University, and currently he's the project professor at the moment. So we'd like to hear from Professor Kobayashi. So far, there have been some areas identified or topics that should be addressed in terms of cooperation between 3 countries. But if possible, if you could share with us your own thoughts, Professor Kobayashi, and also, if possible, if you could comment on what you thought after hearing from the 3 panelists. If you could also share your thoughts with us, that would be appreciated. We have about 30 minutes. We have 4 panelists, so that comes out to be 7.5 minutes each if I were to simply calculate it. But so if you could take up about that much, that would be appreciated. Thank you very much. My name is Kobayashi. First, there was keynote speech and presentation, so I'd like to start with my own thoughts or impressions after hearing their speeches. We actually had a meeting for about 2 hours with the 3 members, or with the 4 of us. We didn't hear from the 3 panelists what they were going to talk about, so I heard their presentations for the first time, and I was very much moved, actually, thinking that many things are possible. So that is my first point. And as for well, China is the biggest, and there's Korea and Japan. And the 3 countries cover about 1/3 of the global scale in just about everything. So if we cannot make a new world by the 3 countries, then the whole world may be in danger. So these 3 countries are very important for the rest of the world. So I came to realize that once again. The second impression I had was that I sense a lot of willingness, especially after having heard the presentation on China. I had to actually reflect upon myself. If China is committed to the 2 degrees target and believes, if they believe that they can do it, that is quite a contrast between that and people from Japan. So if China can do it, then Japan would have to do it. Earlier, Professor Kawaguchi, or Minister Kawaguchi, mentioned, and we have Japan and Korea are relatively at a high level compared to the 2-ton per capita 2-ton target. So based on these, I'd like to talk about what we could do. So I present this or pose this question of what possible research themes can be explored. And this is something I took from WRI, but there are extensive supply chain network among the three countries. So the materials are obtained or procured from China or Korea and are turned into or manufactured into products in Japan and are exported. So what is emitted in China is actually something that is indirectly emitted by Japanese consumers. Conversely, when final product is used in China, they may be using something that was designed in Japan. So among these three countries, the emissions are made sort of collectively. So that needs to be quantified first. And we need to think of a way to reduce the overall emissions across three countries. There was a mention of creating a carbon market earlier. If there was such a thing, then we could reduce the overall carbon emissions among the three countries. You cannot reduce the emissions in just one country. So even if the emissions are to go up, it can be reduced drastically at the time of consumption. So there are different ways, and we should reutilize the close economic cooperation among the three countries so that the CO2 overall can be reduced throughout the life cycle of products. So that's one possible research theme. And this one is something that is being done in Japan, the model eco-cities or future cities, to turn cities into environmentally friendly cities. So these efforts are being pursued. The background of this is that in Japan, the population is expected to decrease or decline. So in the given the declining populations, the challenge would have to be how you can create compact cities. So that's why there's a lot of emphasis on urban planning or designing eco-friendly cities. But then when you think about it, in China and in Korea, there's aging society, and eventually population will peak out. Not just the CO2, but the population would peak out as well. Of course, if the population continues to decline, then the countries would disappear. So it would have to stabilize at one point. But we will usher in a society with an aging population accounting for a big portion ahead of others in the world. So how can we create a society where the elderly citizens are quite active, but also at the same time CO2 emissions are low? So that can be a common theme that many countries in the world may be interested in. The Minister Kawaguchi talked about this a bit in particular. Something that we'd like people from China to learn about is that we, in Japan or in Korea, we didn't do such a good job in terms of urban planning or city planning. So maybe this is something that we can all work together on to come up with better ways of planning for cities. Lastly, I'd like to talk about the capabilities or the power of business or finance. There were these aspects mentioned in all three presentations, but the economic power of China, Japan, and Korea is quite huge. It doesn't mean that the governments are doing such a good job. I was part of the government, so I shouldn't be criticizing governments. But thanks to that, thanks to the efforts being made in the private sector, the economy is quite powerful. So we could utilize the private sector power for the environment or for other public interests like peace, welfare, and human rights. So we could utilize private sector capabilities. But then the private sector power cannot be sustained unless there's a profit to be made. So we should think about how to make a profit in the environment-related area. It just so happens that I'm chairing this committee. In Marunouchi, we have people from corporations to think of a way to have successful business. And so we looked at successful cases and we tried to draw the successful factors. Usually these three things are identified. If we do further research, along with China and Korea, we could do a lot more. So a lot has been said already about co-benefit or multi-benefits, or co-evolution with the clients and the society. So these themes could be explored in terms of research efforts, and we could think of how better we can utilize the private sector capabilities. There are many other things we could talk about or think about. So I hope that research efforts are to be made in these areas. Thank you very much.
No.
So we have heard from 4 speakers. They have all made very important points. Areas of cooperation among the 3 countries can be quite diverse, but roughly speaking, energy-related area is one, renewable energy and natural gas and international gas pipeline connectivity and electricity grid connectivity and the securing of safety of nuclear power. All these topics have been covered. And as for coal-fired thermal power generation, this is a challenge for us all. How can we address this challenge? So that's one thing. And another thing is about the economic policy, creation of regional carbon market or carbon pricing is another approach in this economic sphere. In relation to that, Dr. Kobayashi addressed the issue of financing. So how can a business make investment into this area? What about other institutions that are available out there? And on top of that, low-carbon urban development. This is an area we can share best practices and experiences. And also corporate supply chain. We need to take a big picture and take the whole supply chain to address common issues among the 3 countries. So for those topics, for the remaining time, like Professor Kawaguchi said, let's talk about how can we cooperate. Through cooperation, we can generate more than 3. 1 + 1 + 1 equals more than 3. So how can we come up with joint research forum? How can we add value from these perspectives? I would like to spend the remainder of the time to address those points. So Professor Kawaguchi, would you like to make a comment? So including what Dr. Kobayashi said, and everyone else also made very important, great points. As the Chinese delegate said, we can do it. If we do it, everyone else will follow. Such a passion is what's required here. So up until 2 years ago, I was a politician, and I would always say, if not me, who would? So that was my pet phrase. Those 3 countries, we need to demonstrate that we can do it, like Dr. Zhang said. We need to show that to the world, that we can do it. Because climate change and global warming, this is a formidable challenge. But then we need to have some incentive. We have to direct our vector towards such incentive. And in this endeavor, to say we can do it is very important. Comparing different policies among 3 countries and learning from best practices, these are all very important. But among all of those approaches, for the 3 countries to come together to create something new is even more important. That is a project we are trying to address here. For instance, emission trading or creation of the emission trading market is one such endeavor. And at the foundation of that, we need to have measurement, verification, review, we need to have standardized approaches for measuring, reviewing, and monitoring. Unless we have such standards, we can't create a joint market. Creation of a joint market needs to have such standards. And for that, we need to have a roadmap of joint research. And global discussion of global warming. So for the three countries to play a role to advance such global discussion, what is necessary is for us to make open our approaches to the world as well as to our general public. And we need to secure transparency and clearly monitor our progress status of the roadmap. So it's very important for us all to disclose what we are doing. And what's equally important is networking, like electricity grid or the market, whereby we can support each other when we are in a greater need. So that is also one potential area of joint project. Using current technology, although our countries are divided by the sea, it is possible to create such a network. And for that purpose, what's important is supply security. We can create such a common grid, but for that to work, it's very important for all of our countries to stay stable. This is about egg or chicken. So if I am to put on a hat of former foreign minister, yes, this kind of joint approach can actually lead to advancement of each of the three countries. That can be called another core benefit. And talking about an ocean, of course, acidification of ocean has something to do with global warming, and the role that an ocean or a sea can play needs to be discussed. And this is another area of joint research for the three countries. Talking about an ocean or a sea, this is not only to do with global warming, but the quality of water. This may not be directly related to global warming, but then this is yet another very important challenge that we can address together. But in any case, I am very happy that I have been able to hear from all of the panelists here very positive remarks. Thank you very much.
Much, Madam Kawaguchi. Next, may I invite Professor Hosen Lee?
Thank you. I see a difficult task and an easy task. And to my mind, the difficult task is to install some system of common carbon market or some system of harmonized carbon tax. That would be a very difficult task, although that is most idealized way of addressing this climate change issues. And I believe that if three countries' finance ministers meet together and declare that the three ministers are trying to seek a way to install a common carbon tax system of three countries, I believe it will be just fantastic news globally. And economists have always said that to resolve these climate change issues, we need to have a global tax. And then when it comes to the way to implement such a concept, everyone just wish to run away from that question. Therefore, if the real authorities of three countries get together and declare their intention to seek such a system, will be a very, very positive news around the world. And I think it will be a very difficult one because establishing a harmonized carbon market is one thing, and then maintaining the carbon market system or maintaining the harmonized carbon tax system is totally different one. Theoretically, all the literature indicate that the carbon price has to rise exponentially for the rest of the century in order to reduce the fossil fuel, the carbon emissions from fossil fuel to zero. Now, that is a tremendous commitment on the part of the government official to follow that carbon tax that was imposed in the previous government, and then follow that, and then accept that carbon tax in the current government and the next government. So that's the reason why I said the carbon tax idea has the test of institutional feasibility, which is very tough to pass. I believe the easy one is the way to expand LNG use. And I think it is possible that the importers from 3 countries meet together along with producer, exporter of LNG to find a way mutually beneficial to producers and consumers for the expansion of LNG, natural gas use in this region. And all 3 countries need to expand LNG to meet the 2 degrees C target. And obviously, you know that for the longer term, without the service of CCS, you shouldn't think of using natural gas either. But as a so-called bridging fuel, you need to have a natural gas in order to substitute coal-fired electricity to approach that the 2 degrees C mitigation pathways. Therefore, I strongly not really recommend, but wish to see a photograph that the producer and consumer dialogue, especially among the importers of these 3 countries, attended by the exporter of the natural gas to this region, and seek a mutually agreeable way to expand the natural gas supply to this region at a affordable price. Here, affordable means that that price has to be competitive against some fuels that will be needed to satisfy the base load generation. I think that is the key, for the success of LNG expansion in this region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Hosen Lee. And next, I would like to invite Dr. Jang Kye-chun, and I particularly appreciate your views on the possible add value of proposed creation of a 3-country collaborating research platform. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry. So I want to mention about the 3 points. First one is we can do. But based on my presentation, still some uncertainty. We should continue to do the feasibility, whether this 3 country can go ahead with a 2-degree emission pathway. For example, when we present our scenario for 2 degrees for China, it's already many arguments. For example, unless one country proposed 80% emission reduction by 2050, compared with 1990. This is altogether 60 years. But our scenario shows that China, after we reach the peak by 2050, in order to reach the 210 or a little bit higher than that, China needs to reduce at least 65% within maybe 25 years. Whether it's feasible or not, because it's totally impact our decision right now in the Chinese 13th five-year plan that's in the coming future. Just recent several weeks, we discussed a lot whether China should stop any new coal-fired power plant building. Just stop. So this is still because we must put this into the policy-making process before October. We're setting our new 5-year plan before that. So we try to work a lot because this is the feasibility for China, whether we can go to 2 degrees or not. Of course, we can install coal-fired power plant, but actually we need a CCS. Or otherwise, we have to close. In our scenario, actually, we are calculating whether China will close 200 gigawatt coal-fired power plant by 2050, which will be a very high cost. They have to close earlier before they reach their lifespan because the normal coal-fired power plant, their lifespan is 35 years. That means every new coal-fired power plant we build now, they will continue to use after 2050. So this is the first one. We should do a lot of this and try to convince our big guys to believe that the 2 degrees is still feasible. The second point is how to work together, these 3 countries. I like the idea the renewable energy, if we do see China and Japan put a lot, Korea, whether they can catch up in the coming future, and whether we can go ahead with nuclear power by these 3 countries, because these 3 countries still big guy in the nuclear power generation. So this is something we have to think about how to work together. And also, Dr. Tai Yong-jun proposed the cities comparison in the 3 countries. I like this very much because Canada is not very active in climate change. But Vancouver is the first big city proposed by 2035, there will be 100% renewable energy city. It's amazing because behind that, there'll be a lot of new technology. They will do this. But whether we can have some city like in this level in our 3 countries, I'm not sure, Beijing, Shanghai, or Tokyo, somewhere also, we can do similar thing. I'm not sure. This is something we need to think about in the coming future because this is a competition among countries for the low carbon technology. But what I'm happy for Madam Kawaguchi's presentation that all the low carbon technology, based on our review, is mainly come from 6 or 7 country or regions: United States, EU, Japan, Korea, China, Australia. This is proved by the picture that R&D data. So you can show these 3 country or regions, they account nearly 90% of R&D in the world. That means in the coming future, all the technology or low carbon or low carbon transition will mainly supported by these 6 country or regions. But Japan, Korea, China, hopefully will account more than 30% of the total investment on R&Ds in the coming future. So this is another story. So last one is I want to mention about how to help others. So we already discussed a lot for the 2 degree Asia. Asia is quite a diverse region. We have very rich countries like Japan and Korea. We also very big emerging countries like China and India. We also have very poor countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, and Bangladesh. So we need to understand how to work together. For example, I just calculated quickly, in Myanmar, the total installed power generation capacity, just like 1 coal-fired power plant in China. So if we want to make them to change how much money they need, what's the burden for local people, whether we can design some new mechanism to help them when they develop their economy, but try to avoid a high carbon pathway. The good news is technology nowadays is getting much cheaper than before. It's amazing. That's the reason why China put a lot of money on renewable energy. And today, if you can see, for example, just show that there's nearly 35% of renewable energy capacity is in China, global one. And also, if you check with the subway, nearly 65% of subway under construction is in China. And you also can check with the nuclear reactor, many things. We are changing this. But what we can work together in this room for the 2 degree Asia. I like this idea very much. Let's see what happens for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. さて、議論を重ねてまいりました。ほとんど
So thank you very much for your discussion. We've already consumed all the time allocated to us. I would like to finally ask Dr. Kobayashi to give us final comments. Well, I was already relaxing because I thought you would not call on me. But anyway, so how to implement all of the things we have been talking about, this is another issue. But talking about the carbon tax, I love carbon tax. It's almost my work life. I have always thought that carbon tax is really necessary, but it's really touchy politically. But for such touchy discussion to take place, we need to have power of politicians. But those politicians who are still acting, they probably will not make any comments on such a touchy issue. So all of the retired politicians can come together from the three countries to talk about such a touchy issue as carbon tax. And of course, we need to utilize university power. So at my university, we have foreign students from China as well as from Korea. For instance, going to Yonsei University, our Japanese students are going to Yonsei University to get master's degrees, for instance. Such university networking is very important. So politicians working together, institutions and universities working together, that's very important. And finally, financing. It's very important to have finance for such three countries collaboration. Thank you very much. Thank you. In this third plenary session, we discussed how three countries can effectively collaborate and disseminate the outcome of such collaboration to the world so that we can lead an example of low carbon society to be emulated across the world. And finally, we would like to see 2 degrees Asia. That was a very important message. Through this event today, three countries, a tripartite climate change high-level forum is something we are trying to establish. And finally, we got very important advice from Dr. Kobayashi as to how to go forward and press ahead with this proposal of the joint forum. So based on the valuable input that we have obtained today through this session, let us work together and generate benefits for all three countries, but at the same time share those benefits across the world. So that's our ultimate aim. And for that purpose, I would like to continue to work together with you. And I would like to ask the audience for your cooperation and support for establishment of such joint forum. And we would like to share the progress status of the establishment of that forum together with the audience in the future. So once again, Professor Kawaguchi and all the panelists, thank you very much, and please give them a big hand if you will. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Director Hamanaka. Thank you very much, all the panelists. I would like to propose a break for the next 10 minutes.